Hey guys, tonight we're taking a gentle journey back in time, all the way to the scorching sands of ancient Egypt. Imagine, if you will, the relentless sun beating down, dust motes dancing in the golden light, and the rhythmic clang of stone on stone. Or perhaps, utterly horrified, depending on your culinary sensibilities. You probably want to survive this daily grind on your modern diet of instant noodles and artisanal coffee. It wasn't a gourmet buffet, but it was consistent. While their portions might have varied slightly, the fundamental building blocks of their diet remained the same. You wouldn't find anyone complaining about the lack of quinoa or avocado toast. Their concerns were far more immediate. Enough calories to lift those stones. You could imagine nets being cast into the life-giving river, bringing in catches of tilapia or catfish. You'd likely munch on onions and garlic, not just for flavor, but for their perceived medicinal properties. They were the superfoods of their day. Lentils and chickpeas also played a significant role, providing essential plant-based protein and fiber. Imagine the satisfying crunch of a raw onion, or the earthy taste of boiled lentils, stewed perhaps with a bit of garlic. These weren't just side dishes. They were vital components of a balanced, if simple, diet. You can almost feel the gritty texture of the earth, clinging to the roots of a freshly pulled radish. Historians still debate the exact frequency of these protein and vegetable additions to the average laborer's diet, but the evidence suggests a far more varied intake than just the basic bread and beer. It wasn't exactly a farm-to-table movement, but it was certainly fresh. These would have been dried or salted to preserve them, ensuring a steady supply even when the river wasn't overflowing with bounty. These would have been a rare but much appreciated addition to the menu, likely reserved for higher-ranking supervisors or as part of a larger communal feast. It paints a picture of a diet that, while perhaps monotonous by modern standards, was surprisingly robust and resourceful, built upon the direct bounty of their environment. You wouldn't find them debating organic versus conventional. If it grew, they ate it. Think of it, a salty, chewy piece of dried fish, offering a concentrated burst of protein and flavor, perhaps a welcome contrast to the blandness of daily bread. It is certainly more appetizing than trying to explain to your ancient Egyptian colleagues why you brought a Tupperware full of kale. This consistent, if somewhat monotonous, diet provided the sustained energy needed for such physically demanding work. It was a testament to the efficient, if simple, agricultural practices of the time that such a vast workforce could be fed, day in and day out, purely from the bounty of the Nile. It was, in its own peculiar way, a perfectly balanced diet for the task at hand. Alongside that hearty loaf, you'd find a large jug of beer. Yes, beer? Oh no, even pyramid builders needed their greens, and a bit of protein to keep those muscles from turning into jelly. You might be surprised to learn that while meat wasn't an everyday luxury, it certainly wasn't unheard of. Archaeological findings, particularly around the workers' villages, show evidence of animal bones. We're talking about cuts of beef and goat, indicating that meat was indeed part of their diet, though likely not for every meal, more of a periodic treat or a reward for hitting certain construction milestones. Imagine the joyous waft of roasting meat filling the air on a special occasion, a welcome departure from the usual yeasty aroma of bread and beer. It's enough to make you salivate even now. But before you start picturing ancient Egyptian frat parties, this was very different from your modern lager. It was thick, nutritious, and low in alcohol, more like a fermented porridge than a celebratory drink. Imagine it, a murky, yeasty brew that probably filled you up almost as much as the bread itself. It was a crucial source of calories, vitamins, and hydration in a world where clean water could be a constant concern. Historians still debate whether the beer was intentionally low alcohol or if the fermentation process simply wasn't as efficient as modern brewing. Either way, it kept the builders going. You'd likely gulp it down, feeling the viscous liquid coat your throat, a welcome relief from the dry air. It is almost comical to think that the very foundation of these monumental structures was built on what essentially amounted to bread and liquid bread. It makes you wonder if beer o'clock was a legitimate break on the construction schedule. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're re-listening from and what time it is for you in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're not a pharaoh lounging on silken cushions, nor a priest intoning sacred words in a cool temple. No, tonight you are one of the unsung heroes, a pyramid builder, your muscles aching, your brow slick with sweat, standing at the foot of one of humanity's most colossal achievements. What did you eat after a long day of moving colossal stones? What sustained you as you toiled under that unforgiving sky? You might imagine a diet of pure grit and sand, but you'd be pleasantly surprised. You find yourself waking with the first sliver of dawn, the air still cool but promising a blistering day. Your stomach rumbles, a familiar companion. Your primary sustenance, the foundation of your pyramid building might, is perhaps unsurprisingly bread. Not the fluffy, airy stuff you might find in a bakery today, mind you. This is heavy, dense, and often coarse, likely made from emmer wheat. Think of it as the original power bar, except it probably contained a fair amount of grit from the grinding stones. Imagine the satisfying, slightly scratchy texture as you chew, feeling the energy slowly seep into your tired limbs. This wasn't just any bread. It was the bedrock of their existence, baked in communal ovens, often by specialized bakers. And when I say specialized, I mean they probably knew how to get just the right amount of char without turning it into a charcoal briquette. Each day, you'd receive your ration. This basic diet of bread and beer wasn't just for the common laborers. It formed the core sustenance for everyone from the overseers to the skilled artisans. As the sun climbs higher, you feel the familiar aches of the morning's labor settling in. But your diet wasn't just bread and beer. But what about the more consistent sources of protein? Fish from the Nile was a staple, providing a readily available and often plentiful source of nourishment. Then there were the vegetables. The fertile Nile floodplains were a gardener's dream, providing a rich bounty of produce. Sometimes you might even have seen the occasional bird, perhaps a duck or a goose, brought in from the marshes. As the midday sun beats down, bringing with it the intense heat of the Egyptian desert, your thoughts might drift to something a little more delightful. While the bulk of your diet was practical and sustaining, ancient Egyptians, even the humble pyramid builders, weren't entirely devoid of the finer things in life. While you, as a pyramid builder, might not have been indulging in honey-drenched pastries every day, the occasional taste would have been a true luxury. Garlic and onions, as we mentioned, were staples for flavor and health. These small, wrinkled tubers, despite their name, are not nuts at all, but rather a root vegetable. Feeding thousands of workers, day in and day out, was an enormous logistical undertaking. When the river flooded, it deposited rich, fertile silt, perfect for growing the vast quantities of grain needed to feed the population. While the official records don't dwell on such unpleasantries, archaeological evidence and historical texts from other periods hint at the challenges of feeding a large population in an ancient agricultural society. Imagine the morale dip, the gnawing hunger, when rations were cut short. It's a sobering thought, reminding you that even the greatest empires faced fundamental struggles. Historians still argue about the frequency and severity of famines during the Old Kingdom, but it's clear that the logistics of food provision were a constant, underlying challenge for the pharaohs. After the waters receded, the planting season began, followed by the harvest. Think of it as ancient Egypt's answer to a factory cafeteria, but on a much grander, dustier scale. You wouldn't find vending machines, but you'd certainly appreciate the consistent delivery of your daily calories. This ensured that despite the arduous labor, the builders were generally well fed, a crucial factor in maintaining the health and productivity of such a vast workforce. After all, a hungry worker is a less productive worker, and nobody wants a grumpy pyramid builder. It was a delicate dance with nature, and any deviation from the expected flood levels could spell disaster. Imagine the collective anxiety if the Nile didn't rise as anticipated, a very real threat of scarcity looming over the entire enterprise. This reliance on the river meant that careful planning and storage were paramount. Granaries, often vast in size, were crucial for stockpiling grain, ensuring there was enough to last through the dry seasons and to feed the massive workforce. You can almost smell the dry, earthy scent of stored grain, a scent of security and sustenance. Imagine the sheer scale of it, not just procuring the food, but transporting it, storing it, and then distributing it efficiently to every single laborer, from the stone quarry to the construction ramps. It was a finely tuned machine, as impressive in its own way as the pyramids themselves. You might visualize long lines of workers waiting patiently for their rations, overseen by meticulous scribes keeping track of every loaf and every jug. They were a common snack, eaten raw or roasted, offering a slightly sweet, chewy texture. Think of them as the ancient world's granola bar, packed with fiber and a decent energy boost. You wouldn't find them in your local grocery store, but back then, they were a perfectly normal part of the diet. It's funny how tastes change, isn't it? What was a common snack for a pyramid builder might be considered an exotic health food today. It just goes to show, one person's peculiar snack is another's everyday sustenance. But they also had access to other interesting additions. Coriander, cumin, and even fenugreek seeds have been found in archaeological contexts, suggesting they weren't just for mummification. These would have added subtle layers of flavor to their stews and porridges, elevating a simple meal into something a bit more interesting. Imagine the earthy scent of cumin wafting from a communal cooking pot, a rare moment of sensory delight amidst the smell of sweat and limestone dust. It reminds you that even in the most arduous conditions, humanity finds a way to appreciate taste. Historians still argue about the precise extent to which these more exotic spices were available to the common laborer, but it's clear they weren't entirely unknown. It's a bit like getting a surprise donut in your lunch pail, a rare but deeply appreciated moment of sugary bliss. There's also evidence of figs and grapes being consumed, especially during their respective seasons. You might picture a few ripe figs, plucked directly from a tree, their sweet, earthy flavor a simple pleasure after a long, dusty morning, or, at least, their version of them. Sweet treats, for instance, weren't a daily occurrence, but they did exist. Dates were a common source of natural sweetness, grown in abundance along the Nile. Imagine biting into a plump, sticky date, its sugary flesh providing a welcome burst of energy and a momentary escape from the relentless grind. It's the ancient world's equivalent of a quick sugar rush, probably without the subsequent crash. Honey was another prized sweetener, often used in conjunction with dates, or as an ingredient in more elaborate confections for the elite. And what about spices? While not as globally sourced as they are today, the Egyptians certainly used them. For something truly unusual, you might have encountered a dish featuring tiger nuts. The afternoon sun begins its slow descent, but the work doesn't stop. The food supply largely depended on the annual inundation of the Nile. Despite all the meticulous planning, there were undoubtedly times of scarcity, perhaps even famine. The distribution system itself was remarkably organized. There were dedicated bakeries and breweries, often operating on an industrial scale, churning out the daily bread and beer. As twilight approaches and the desert air begins to cool, your thoughts might turn not just to the day's hard work. Besides being a rare sweet treat, food held immense symbolic importance. Funerary models of bakeries and breweries have been discovered in tombs, suggesting that the essential tasks of food production were expected to continue in the afterlife. It's a comforting thought. in its own way, that even in eternity, the simple, sustaining pleasures of freshly baked bread and a cool drink would be readily available. You wouldn't find them requesting a phantom pizza delivery service, but the sentiment was much the same. So, as you drift off, perhaps you can picture those ancient pyramid builders, their bellies full of emmer bread, and Nile fish, resting from their colossal labors, sustained not just by the food of their mortal lives, but by the promise of an eternally provisioned afterlife, particularly in their beliefs about the afterlife. You might picture the painstaking preparation of offerings, loaves of bread, joints of meat, baskets of fruit, all laid out meticulously in tombs. These weren't just decorative. They were believed to sustain the deceased in their journey through the Duat, the underworld. Imagine the pharaoh, eternally refreshed by magically replenished feasts, while you, the humble builder, hoped for a steady supply of ethereal beer. It reminds you that even after death, the basic needs, especially for a good meal, remained paramount, was highly valued for its antiseptic properties. You can imagine a cut being cleaned with water and then carefully dressed with a dollop of honey, believed to prevent infection and promote healing. It's certainly a more pleasant thought than the moldy bread. Onions and garlic, those pungent staples, were not just for flavor. They were revered for their prophylactic qualities, believed to ward off illness and maintain strength. So, while you might not have had a doctor on call, your daily diet was, in a sense, your first line of defense against the many ailments of ancient life. Historians still argue about the true efficacy of some of these ancient medical practices, but their intent was clear: to use available resources for health, but to your well-being. The peculiar diets of Egyptian pyramid builders weren't just about sustenance. They played a role in health and, surprisingly, even in their beliefs about the afterlife. When it came to medicine, ancient Egyptians often turned to what was at hand, and food was a powerful tool in their rudimentary pharmacy. You can imagine a cut on your hand, perhaps from a stray stone chip. Instead of a modern antiseptic, you might be given a poultice made from moldy bread, a very early, if unwitting, form of penicillin. It sounds a bit grim, doesn't it? But historical texts suggest such practices, highlighting a practical, if not always scientifically understood, application of their daily provisions to aid healing. Honey beyond the physical. This concept extended even to the tools of their trade.